Shabbat Shalom. I hope that this pre-Shabbos video finds you and your family healthy and safe and enjoying this beautiful Friday afternoon. Last week we read the Parsha of Bamidbar, the very first Parsha in the book of Numbers, and described how the tribes were arranged around the tabernacle. The text describes what is essentially a military formation with the most valuable asset of the Israelites, that is the Holy Ark, or the Mishkan, at the very center. At the end of this week's Parsha, the Parsha of Nasso, there's a long and somewhat tedious passage that details the various gifts brought by the tribal chieftains as the tabernacle was dedicated. One might ask that why, when the Torah generally chooses to use less words, why does this description take up so much room in the Parsha? Same gifts are repeated over and over again. One of the silver bowl, one silver basin, each filled with incense, and the same number of kind of sacrificial animals. All these are repeated one after the next, over and over again, the same thing. Rabbi Dr. Ismar Shorish, the former chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary, in his book "In Canon Without Closure," writes about this question. He says the dedicatory celebration is not an occasion to rank tribal leaders by the birth of their eponym or the size of their tribe, but by their location in the military formation that protects the camp in transit. The list does not betray, says Shorish, that some tribes are privileged or more important. The uniformity in giving, he adds, conveys rather an extraordinary sense of national unity, unquote. Some 3,500 years later, that unity has been particularly apparent, especially over the last 10 days while Israel has been under attack. Since the creation of the State of Israel, the Jewish people have come together, circled the wagons, if you will, to defend, support, and protect the Jewish nation, particularly in times of crisis. Here in the diaspora, in Galut, we send money. We write our elected officials, urging them to stand with Israel, and we rally to Israel's defense. Among us, we may have differing views on specific policies of the Israeli government, but we remain united in Israel's right to exist as the world's only nation for the Jewish people. But in the diaspora, our adversaries are not firing rockets. While many of our kids have been off campus this year, I feel that they are in for a surprise when they return, because on campuses across the country, our young people are fighting a war of disinformation. It's a campaign of disinformation that's born out of ignorance, intersectionalism, and a youthful desire to associate with seemingly progressive values. The defense against disinformation requires a different kind of armor, a different kind of response. It requires education, real education. Here in the diaspora, the one major takeaway from the last 10 days ought to be the recognition of a desperate need for Israel education among our young people. And I don't mean hasbara, the kind of easy to digest, one-sided narrative that reduces a complex history to a easy remember bullet points. Birthright has done an outstanding job of introducing thousands of college and post-college young adults to their heritage. But if we've learned anything from the tsunami of anti-Israel, anti-Semitic Facebook posts, TikTok videos, Instagram stories, Twitter tweets, not to mention the violent protests taking place in major American and European cities, if we've learned anything, it is that the best way to tell a lie is to tell half a story, make it quick, make it emotional, and just simply keep retelling it. And that's a lesson that the Jewish people should know well by now. I know that some of you may not like what I have to say, but we have done our college-age students a disservice by seeking to arm them with easy talking points and simple answers. Who could argue with the evils of apartheid and ethnic cleansing and genocide? Most of our college-age students can't, because they're not prepared. They're not prepared to respond to these kinds of highly charged false accusations. If they've learned anything about Israel, it's about Israel, the startup nation, the miracle of high tech, Perhaps they've learned some archaeology or about Gal Gadot. Maybe they've learned a little bit about Israeli geopolitics or government. Maybe they've even found a nice Jewish guy or girl. That's always worthwhile. But what they haven't learned is history. Not a whitewashed version of history, rather the kind of history that allows an intelligent person to hear someone else's narrative, acknowledge suffering where it exists, seek dialogue, and at the same time have the courage and the pride, and most importantly, the knowledge base to stand up unapologetically for the justness of Israel's cause and Israel's right to exist as the only Jewish state in the world. It's time for us to remind the world that history is not black and white. Unity is crucial in times of crisis, but it's the deep education of our youth, an appreciation for the nuances and the lessons of history that will ultimately provide the long-term protection for the Jewish people. Am Yisrael Chai, and Shabbat Shalom to all.